audience. Hello, good morning. Here on the stage and the second day of this very interesting conference, and well, let's start it. I wanted to make some remarks on the title or the key phrase of this meeting here, the future of living. And I think it's always a good thing to really go back to the very basic questions, and this is, of course, what do we mean when we talk about the future? I mean, there are these two different ways to think about the future. The one is the when question, and the other one, of course, is the what question. So when will future be? Well, that's super easy. It's always the next moment, as we know. So probably this is not really the very interesting question at all, because it means that the only thing we can do is just waiting for the future to come. And maybe that's the reason, because it's so passive. It's somehow also very nice way for many people just to kind of stay out of the difficulties to think about the future. So I think it's, of course, much more interesting to look at the what question. What is the future? What will the future be? And what future do we want to happen for us? And I think this is, for me, a very important question, in particular with all these considerations and discussions about artificial intelligence, because there is always this looming big thing in the future, the singularity. And since decades, it's kind of forecasted that somewhere now in the middle of this century, we will have this moment when the singularity is happening, and then the machines will become autonomous and take over. And I think it's such a nice but equally stupid way to look at it, because this is a forecast or a way to look at the future that, of course, the only thing that is happening is we are getting afraid. It's kind of paralyzing us. And I think what we rather should do, instead of thinking about how will this singularity be, when will it come, is actually how it might come, might not. I don't know. I'm really not an expert good enough to make a prognosis on this. But I think what we should do is really use our time until then, and there is still plenty of time. This is something I can definitely assure you, to use this time to grow our responsibility, our capability as society as well as individuals, to deal with the responsibility that we are taking upon us right now by developing these systems and allowing more and more applications of these systems. But it's not only the question of the when and what, it's also, of course, a big question of the where. And I really like these memes that are popping up now about our two super rich techno guys, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who are spending all their money in preparing their escape from the planet. And I mean, of course, it's a totally stupid thing. You don't even have to ask the question where the future is happening, at least in the global context, because the only place where our future can happen and will happen is, of course, the place here on our Earth. And there are really a lot of nice images now out there. And it's, of course, about this escapism. So why do these guys really think that the best way to provide for their future is going to Mars or somewhere else? But it seems to be a big pattern in the brains of our big techno leaders that they think that escape is probably the best way into the future. And this is the big vision now of Mark Zuckerberg, his version of the metaverse. I don't know if you ever read Neil Stephenson. Probably very few of the people who are now in this metaverse discussion ever read Snow Crash. Otherwise, I cannot imagine why they would be so excited about these really silly ideas. I mean, we all have now 1.5, almost 2 years behind us where we had to spend so much time instead of real conferences and meeting with Zoom and Teams and all these different tools. And this was already awkward enough. Now, I mean, imagine if this becomes reality, and then when we cannot sit together, at least a few people like we have today, then this would be the way how we are doing our conferences. I mean, imagine Bruce yesterday being one of these avatars, or Yuri being one of these avatars. I mean, it could be fun, definitely, but I think it only will be fun if it's not happening in the infrastructure and the networks of Zuckerberg and the others. And of course, what with all these things we are so easily forgetting is that behind all these nice features and technologies, there is not just a technology, a machine, a digital system. At the end, of course, it's always human being and human beings who are working under really terrible conditions, who are exploited and all these kind of things. So I'm sorry a little bit about that. Probably at the moment, every lecture about the future and technology, in particular AI, immediately goes into this kind of dystopian direction, but maybe we can find also some more reassuring and positive directions in the future. And I think this is also a very interesting topic, I mean, because no way we are in a situation already, and we are progressing super fast in a situation where the coexistence between man and machine gets more and more and more and more intimate. I mean, this is whether it's the increasing density of the technical networks that are woven around us, or whether it's, we saw yesterday a lecture of exoskeletons, the idea to melt the human body with the robots, and of course we have to think about all the things that are coming when biotechnology, genetic engineering, and information technology, digital technology are combined, becoming parts of our interior of our body. Not only the physical body, but of course also our digital body. And it could be all wonderful, but then again, you know, the thing is, so much exciting progress is happening, but with technology there's one thing, it always fails. And I like this little video that I found in the internet very much, because you might know Ars Electronica, our Future Lab, invented these drone shows already in 2012, and then the big companies came and made out a big business. And I was actually very surprised that it took so long until it finally happened, that during one of these drone shows the system broke down and all these hundreds of drones were raining down from the sky. So things are getting wrong, but the question, of course, is who do we blame for, and actually what kind of collateral damage can be done. And this was also very interesting note from a few months. They discovered that in the UK, for a period of about 14 years, 900 employees, both men, both women, have been accused and actually also found guilty for stealing money and stealing letters and parcels. And after 14 years, after, as they say, 900 people have been really put in terrible situation, they found out, well, actually it was the computer system, the booking system of a company called Fujitsu that went wrong. But of course, nobody thought about this, because we are so excited about technology, and when we have technology, we want to use it. And this is really one of my favorite examples for an AI conference, because usually when you go to these AI meetings, there is always, AI is all around us. And then they list all these wonderful things, like when you Google, you are using AI and all these kind of things. But you know, this is really, AI is now in the middle of our life. We even can purchase a toothbrush that is powered by AI. And of course, Colibri is the first toothbrush in the world. And this is happening in a situation where, of course, we have a huge dynamic. And I think you cannot talk about these issues of digital technology, AI, and the future without looking at the shifts of the demography of our world. I mean, we have, and the numbers, of course, are very vague. They are compiled by the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. So I think somehow there might be a truth behind it. And it's not only really exciting I'm excited about it, I have to admit it, that there are almost 5 billion people now connected to the internet, and even more so is, of course, these 2.7 billion people that are using Facebook at least once a month. And I always do this now in my lectures just to compare the size of what we are talking about. There is no other human community that has the size of all the people who are using Facebook, the social media platform that is ruled, governed by one singular person. The next group that we could call a kind of global human society or community is the Christians with 2.2 billion. If we take like the Catholics, who have a very similar structure, like one guy on top who decides everything and who is responsible for everything, they are only 1.3 billion people. And I think it's really interesting to compare this, not that it really makes sense, but I think this question, can we compare this at all, is already very interesting, because it brings us to the point how difficult it is to really kind of get a measurement or to grasp what this dimension of our digital world really is taking on and how it's developing. And this is also one of my favorite statistics about the daily time that people spend using the internet. You see the highest number here is the Philippines with more than 10 hours. The global average is 6 hours, 42 minutes, and Belgium here is around with 5 hours. And the really interesting thing is, because I think the numbers changed in between, this is not the latest statistics, but what's really interesting, when you look at this bar that indicates the world average, then you see on the left side where it's really growing, it's almost only those countries that we here in Europe usually call the third world, the developing countries, or if we are very nice, we call them emerging economies. While on the right side, where it goes down to Japan with almost only 4 hours, it is mainly the European countries, the so-called industrialized countries. I don't really know what this means, what sense we can make of it, but one thing is totally clear: we are witnessing, nevertheless, a very interesting shift in the global scale. I mean, of course, it's totally clear the power of the digital system still remains in the United States and the big companies. It is growingly also centering, of course, in China, and Europe is running behind it. But then there are these interesting shifts that, of course, in Nigeria already now we have more people connected to the internet than in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland together. It's totally clear because it's so many more people there. But we all know our European way how to look at these countries. How are we also dealing with the people? And I mean, the same thing is when you look at Japan and Indonesia. So these are really dynamic forces that we don't consider at all in our political decisions, and I think even as individuals we don't really recognize this enough. And I think it's also interesting to look at the numbers here with India and China, not so much the number of people, but the percentage of saturation. When you see in the European countries, we are almost, most of the countries are now beyond 90% of saturation with internet connectivity. In India, it's 34%. In China, it's a little bit more than 50% only. So you see the huge potential that is still happening there. And of course, I think you can also imagine how different it is really to think of new also business models. How can business be done in these areas? And then immediately we have to ask our question, of course, yes, there are 91 million people in Nigeria and the internet, but who owns their internet infrastructure? And I'm pretty sure it's not Nigerian companies. The same thing is when we look at connectivity and speed. So wherever we look at, it's the same picture. So on the left side here, you see the countries that have the fastest mobile internet connection here. And these are new players. 10, 15 years ago, when you were looking at, what are the countries who have the best infrastructure? you wouldn't have found many of these countries. But when you look on the right side, where you see the losers, so to say, well, this is a very familiar picture. So, and I think this question of how are we dealing with this gap and these shifts is really important. But the good thing is we don't have to care, because the internet is so much fun, and we have all these wonderful, creative young people with their startups who produce really the valuable content and business applications of tomorrow, like this one, where you can use an app to create your virtual girlfriend, and then depending on how much money you are willing to pay, 9 euros, 29 euros, or $49 here, you can exchange SMS or WhatsApp or Facebook messages with your virtual girlfriend in a different size. So if you only pay $10, then you probably only have, it's too small here, I can't read it anymore. You have like hundreds SMS that you can share, but if you pay more, you can of course communicate more. And it's really great because you don't have to do any kind of social interaction anymore. Everything is taken care for you. Or another example of really very, very useful way to utilize all these technical possibilities and the resources are, of course, things like these sneakers from Nike, where you don't have to go anymore, old people like me, to tie the laces. You just take out your smartphone, you open the app, and then you say stronger or weaker. And the nice thing, of course, where things are breaking, that's really a nice thing of technology. The first software update already broke the system, and only one of the shoes was working. But of course, not all the things that look funny and sound funny have such a funny or stupid background. This is a very interesting phenomenon I found. That in the US there are cities now where smartphones hanging in the trees around certain places where Amazon has its warehouse and delivery posts, because they are running a system that automatically, of course, no humans are doing this anymore, we leave it over to the machines, that the system looks for the driver who is closest to the next delivery. And this driver automatically gets badged the job and drives there, picks up and goes there. So there is now a kind of shadow economy, a company that is, of course, I don't think they are really seriously registered. It's more a kind of black and probably even half illegal business. They are hanging cell phones now around these delivery centers. And if you are an Amazon driver and if you pay them a fee, they make sure that they dispatch the job to you and not to others. And we talk so much about creativity in the digital world, and I think that's one example, but of course the best examples for this you always find in the arts, and you probably know this wonderful project by Simon Weckert, where he put 99 smartphones with GPS activated in his little trailer, and then he walked through the city of Berlin and walked back and forth and actually really created a virtual traffic jam, allowing the people living in the street to really spend a few minutes at least. I don't know how long it took Google to recognize it, but at least to spend a few minutes with more silence. And we cannot leave out, of course, because it's an artists' conference, a cultural and art conference as well, the new darling of digital art, of course, the NFTs. Isn't it great? You probably all heard about this. Artists are now really making millions by selling their JPEGs on the markets, and even the trailblazers of the art market like Sotheby's and Christie's, they even jump now on the bandwagon and make auctions with so-called NFTs. But the interesting thing is, again, we artists always tend to see our world as the whole world. The real stuff that I think is nice when we look at these NFTs and this way how blockchains are being used to create new business models, of course, I mean, there is a video I never actually understood why this video became viral at all. You might remember, it's very old, so the people who are in this business for quite a while might remember it. It was just the little baby biting the finger of the brother, and suddenly the video went viral, and now it was actually sold for $760,000. Of course, not dollars in some cryptocurrency, and if they are ever able to really so exchange it in a good moment, they might really make some serious money with it. But I even like more the thing with the crypto horses. This is a whole business platform now where you can raise digital horses. So it's all about, again, generative algorithms, but not creating beautiful artworks, but creating these horses. And then there are platforms where you can bring your virtual horses to race against each other. And of course, there's the whole industry behind it, the betting industry, so there's a lot of money made and probably much more money lost with betting at the virtual horses. They trade and exchange their horses. And again, I think the interesting point is just I really see it in a positive way. It might not sound like it, but these are all examples of our human creativity. And even, I mean, it's nicer for these presentations to look at projects that are funny somehow. But behind this, of course, I think is a very interesting view on the very broad diversity and variety of how we are actually, as human society, as humans, as individuals, think about and make sense of this digital transformation. But again, what we usually don't see or don't want to see is behind all this virtual stuff is, of course, very real, very physical infrastructure that has to be owned by somebody, that has to be paid by somebody. This is not just the issue with Bitcoin. This is maybe even more the issue with any kind of data center. This is actually the virtual world, how it really looks. It's not the nice little avatars that we saw in the advertisement of Facebook. I think that's much more the face of our digital time. And what I like very much here is this comparison that I made a few years ago. When you look into these data centers, I mean, they are basically organized and built in the same way as libraries were ordering and managing all the information 100 years ago. And these are actually not some examples. These are examples from the famous Mundaneum from Paul Autley. So we are here in Belgium, and maybe we all should make a little bow for the genius person, Paul Autley, who probably very few people know about him, and I don't start a lecture about him right now. I think the interesting point for me is the similarity. There might be, of course, very practical reasons to put, so to say, information containers, put them up always in the same way. But I think it also has to do with the fact that when we get new technologies and new possibilities, we cannot help then using paradigms of the history, the way we did things so far. We want to continue to do it in the same way with the new technology. And while I think the examples that I showed before are giving good examples for the potential creativity, this, of course, is then again an example of how limited we are in the way how we are actually able to deal with new technologies, and in particular when we're introducing them. And I think that's also interesting when we look at all the buzzwords that go around it. Very old people might know words like cybernetics and microelectronics. These were really super buzzwords in the 50s, going up into the 70s. Then information technology became one of these example words, or informatics. All, of course, words, and there were many more, they are just a few examples of this. All words that really came from the way how technicians are thinking about this. And then came the World Digital Revolution. And I think there's really something behind it that actually suddenly bringing in the word revolution in connection with this technology is probably one of the main reasons why so many of these, I would call them post 68, 70 young people who were mainly interested and excited about, how can we change the world? What's our possibilities now as young people to go in the world and change something? And I'm speaking of my own experience. I was super intrigued when I read the word revolution. This was the moment when the digital technology really started to make sense of me. And then came virtual reality. And you can really see when the virtual reality in the bus came up, there were a growing number of artists, of storytellers, people working in film industry that totally got excited about digital technology. And the World Wide Web and social media, of course, was probably really the next, I call it, immigration wave into the digital world. This is, of course, a thing that happened around 2007, in particular with iPhone and the smartphones. And this was also the time when technology industry, the so-called big tech, was really coming, so say, very strongly back also in the public awareness of this technology. And then, I mean, imagine, they really created names for their new super future technology that they were trying to sell to everybody, like big data. I mean, imagine, how stupid do you have to be as a technical entrepreneur, big tech guy, or advertisement responsible person for this, to call a technology that, of course, is 100% surveillance technology, because this is what it is. Digital technology is a data technology. All the advantages of digital technology are based on the fact that it can collect data in huge amounts very fast. It can understand data, it can organize data, it can recognize pattern. Well, and this is what we call surveillance. So whenever you think that digital technology or digital world could be without surveillance, you're totally wrong. This is a matter of fact. In the same way as rain is wet, that's it. But we manage quite well as a human society to deal with rain, at least until now. We'll see how the next decades are going on with this. But they really call this big data. I mean, big brother, big data. I mean, and were really quite surprised that it really got a very big problem, an image problem. And then, of course, the really nice thing happened, and I put this kind of 3 phases here again. They rediscovered the term artificial intelligence. Bruce told us already yesterday that it goes back to the 50s, so it should be also in the first line here. But this was a time where artificial intelligence was, of course, depending on the time, only really recognized and seen by a very small group of people. But in the age of social media, in the age of digital technology, suddenly bringing up artificial intelligence was the best marketing move that you ever could think of. Because all these words before, and think again, big data, industry 4.0, even virtual reality, augmented reality, all these kind of things are purely technical terms. And it always led to the situation, and I'm in this business of educating people about technology since decades, as you have heard. And whenever we try to engage people, the thing was, yes, I'm not sure, this is also technological, I don't understand it, I leave it up to the experts. The moment, and it's really the case that happened, the moment artificial intelligence popped up, everybody was fine with it. Everybody said, yes, this is something I'm concerned, I'm interested. And this is, I think, insofar very important because, of course, artificial intelligence is by far nothing or has nothing to do with what we would consider with a word like intelligence. It is automatic statistics, as we heard yesterday. I like very much also the term heuristic optimation, because heuristics is also the science of trial and error, and basically this is what learning always means. So I think this is this combination of how data and how machines are learning. This is heuristic optimation, and of course automated statistics. So it is true, it's clear, AI is nothing else, at least the AI that we have right now, than something like data mining on steroids. But nevertheless, there is something happening right now, triggered by this technology and by the possibilities that this technology has so far, which I would call something really like a next step of digital transformation into something like maybe digital transmutation or whatever nice word you could find for it. And this is the move from automatization to autonomization. Because basically when we look at what we have been doing with digital technology so far, is we have been digitizing the industrial world. This is automatization. All the processes, everything that we have done without computers, but with machines before, starting with the steam engine, we are now doing with computers or controlled at least by computers and optimized by computers. But now, of course, what we are aiming to do is a digitalization of thinking and decision making. And it's very important here to consider this has nothing to do with intelligence or with real autonomy of the systems. Because what we are doing in this phase of autonomization, you know all these examples. There are these AI systems that are supporting the judges in the United States to decide whether somebody can go free or not. We have this even in Austria that the department that is responsible for unemployed people uses an AI to decide what would be the best program for people to help them to get back into employment, but also decides whether these people have a chance at all to go back into employment. And there are many, many things where we already now started to leave over the decision-making to the machines. Of course, officially we still say, well, this is just a recommendation. And then the doctor, the lawyer, the judge, the officer, whatever, of course, looks at it again and makes the final decision. But we all know that given the pressure of money and budgets and also our laziness, I mean, think about yourself. You have such a system and twice it makes a good decision, the third time you don't even ask anymore and you just take the decision. So the interesting thing is that this very, very big, so to say, hype or this buzz of artificial intelligence, where it's always connected with autonomy, and replacing the capacity and also the responsibility of humans for decision-making. Technologically, we don't have systems at all that are able to do this. But what these systems can do, these machine learning systems, is already enough that we, in the way how we are using and employing this technology, totally falling into this trap. And the whole question of the idea that these systems are autonomous is even stronger embedded in the whole way how we talk about it. And I put here together some examples from, well, Wired magazine, there is something from BBC, some other magazines, some science magazines, and make the test yourself. Go into Google and look for new achievements of AI. And almost 99% you will find formulations like Google's hand-fed AI now gives answers. Microsoft's AI can detect your emotions. Google AI reads retinas. Machine learning has revealed exactly how much of Shakespeare, blah, blah, blah. And you know what's wrong with this? I mean, it's wrong that it's always Google, Microsoft, and the same companies. But what's really wrong from a cultural perspective is that we adopt a language where we say AI does something. And of course, it's totally stupid and wrong because it's never AI that achieves something or does something. It's always us. We, scientists, use AI to find better ways for protein folding. Scientists use AI to find out something about Shakespeare. This would be the only way how to really talk about it. And I think what's really, again, very nicely connected, this is, of course, then the question, where do we put responsibilities? Because when we always talk about technology, and again, I could make the same lecture presentation and statements even 10 years ago, because it's not an issue of AI. This is not something where the new hype or the developments of machine learning have brought new ways how we communicate it. It's a very, very old and established pattern that we talk about the technology as something that has nothing to do with us. I often compare it with as if a UFO had been flying over Earth and then dropping down this technology to plague us. That's the kind of way how we think about technology. And of course, there are 2 points connected with it. It's very nice because if you say that technology, and very often people, when they talk about it, make this kind of body gestures, then we are putting also aside our responsibility. It's not me, sorry, it's the technology doing it. And then, well, when you ask me, yeah, but who is behind the technology? Yeah, the technicians and the companies in the big tech. What is nicer and easier than just to blame the big tech? Also, they deserve it. This is, of course, no question. But the second point is even worse, I think, because when we talk about and think about technology this way, we are also separating ourselves from not only the responsibility that we have for it, but also from the possibilities that we could use, that we could take, that we could use to have to benefit from it and participate also in the development of it. And I think this is, you know, I leave it up to you. What and who should we be afraid of? Just to give you an information, because I think, well, this is easy. You also know here the guy walking around all these virtual reality sheeps. This is a group photo of the people of OpenAI. This is one of the leading companies. You heard GPT-3 and all these buzzwords these days also. Owned by not owned by Microsoft, but very strongly controlled by Microsoft right now. I mean, look at these really nice people. Do you really think they are our enemies? These are the people we have to be afraid of? That our future will look like this, that robodogs will run around with guns, or we all will end up, so to say, encapsulated in virtual reality so that we don't mess around with the real world anymore. So the question, who is in control, who has the power, is a political question, of course, and it's also a question then that leads again to this point, who can control these powers? And I think that's really a very, very important thing, that we make sure that we are not misunderstanding our role in this whole thing. And just to give you a perspective, when I say, you know, that we cannot externalize technology. Technology is part of our culture. It is something that we create and that we are going to use. And this is not something that started with computers. That didn't start with smartphones. It didn't start with Google. It didn't start with even with the telephone. It goes really back into human history. And there is always this idea that we could use technology and science to unveil the mysteries of our world, to understand the real reality in our world. And this goes back to famous people like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, one of the really heroes of the 17th century science here in Europe. He invented this legendary first calculation machine. And when he invented it and built it, I have to switch here as well. Well, what did he do? He wrote a very nice paper about it. And then he said, I invented this machine to liberate the human spirit from the very nasty, trivial works of calculating. I mean, this really sounds great. It's a great vision for humanity. What he forgot to mention is that the guy who paid for this development was also responsible for collecting the taxes and really benefited a lot from the invention of such a machine. But this is a kind of dilemma that we always have with technology. And I could talk hours about examples where when we go to the roots of technology, we don't find the military or the warfare, we don't find the profit and the greed of companies, we find great human visions. It's a very interesting thing that we develop technology always because we want to make the world a little bit better. And it goes back now a generation earlier, Anastasius Kircher, another really wonderful engineer and scientist, and you might have seen some of these drawings in museums or in books. I mean, just imagine what this guy had in mind and what he was capable of developing in this very early time. And of course, music machines automated machines were one of the really big things to be developed, and it was always driven by this inspiration that if we are just able to have the right way to connect the right information, then suddenly it will make boom. You just need to find this right combination, this right algorithm, would we say today, and then boom. So the singularity itself is not something that was invented by Ray Kurzweil or Schönhuber or one of these people. This is a permanent pattern in human history and mind that we think if we just put enough knowledge and technology together, we will finally be able, so to say, to look beyond the very big garden fence of our human existence. And this is a comparison that I like really very much because basically we all know these examples of how neural networks today are described. So every input is connected with every output, layer by layer. And this is 1641, Anastasius Kircher created this tabula combinatoria. And this is actually only the data visualization that he made about the work of a guy who lived a few hundred years before. In the 13th century, 13th, 14th century, Ramon Llull, actually a big guy from Catalonia, so thanks to all the guys from Barcelona that somebody like Ramon Llull was supported there, because he had this really great vision that if he just would make the right combination of the most important words of the Holy Bible, then he could prove the righteousness of God. And I think that actually, I mean, he was a very religious person. I mean, in the 13th century, you couldn't be anything else than really religious. But I think he was the first prototype of a really very clever science manager and research manager, because with this idea that he has the mathematical and theoretical means to prove the existence of God, and in particular to prove that, of course, only the Catholic God is the right one, he went to the Pope and said to him, okay, if you give me enough money, I can create a kind of machine, a system that allows us, that makes it possible to prove that our Catholic God is the only right one. And then I will go to the countries of the heathens, to the Muslims, and with my machine, with my system, I will actually convert them and make sure they all understand that they believe in the wrong God and we believe in the right God. It's really hard to tell if he really believed in this or not, and I'm totally admire the guy, what he did. He was really a great philosopher and scientist and thinker. But I think it's also a good example to show that putting technology and development forward always needs a kind of narrative. And we are very used to, at the moment, to really make fun of the narratives of artificial intelligence. And of course, we have good reason again when we see it like this. But then again, I think what is necessary is to develop narratives, to develop a story that should be not only the story of the industry. It should not be only the story of Mark Zuckerberg or the story of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all these guys. It should be the story of all of us. And I think this is really the very important point we have to look at when we consider the collaboration of art and science, because who else could present, develop, discuss with us the necessary narratives we need that at the end, hopefully we might be possible as a human society to really go into a future that allows this coexistence between man and machine in a better way as it does so far. And this is, of course, now pure, naive, optimistic utopism. We all every day see so many examples of why it won't be possible, and I'm skipping all this wonderful historic part. Come to our museum to see all this. And I wanted actually... just wanted to finish with this one. Because we could see these two videos as a very good proof that the match between man and machine no problem, we are still much better. I mean, look at the way how she is able to control her body. Look at the excitement of her friends and colleagues. But I think the way we think about these two videos as a match between man and machine, we already make the very big mistake. Because both videos show the exciting excellence and possibilities and capabilities of mankind. I mean, imagine. Well, yeah, okay, it tumbles, of course, things break. But imagine what it means in terms of cultural and scientific achievement that we are able to produce this kind of machines yet. And if we learn to understand that this is not a one or the other, this is not necessarily a conflict, if we are willing in a thoughtful way to understand and take this technology and the developments of technology into our life, into our culture, I think this is the only way that we might have to really get along. And
I en värld där allt fler pratar om virtual reality är vi stolta över att presentera natural reality.
Så det här är alltså natural reality-glasögon. Här får du ett. Här får du ett. Tack. Så träna försiktigt med hjälp av båda händerna över huvudet.
Ska jag emanera?
Ja, precis.
Ett träd.
Det känns ju till och med kallt.
Nu är det 360.
Det är nästan som man bara vill ta på allting.
Det är blött.
Ja, precis.
Alltså när jag går rätt fram här nu så är det precis som att grenarna kommer emot mig här.
Visst är det amazing.
Det är helt amazing.
because we will need all our ingenuity and all the possibilities that we can create with technology, and we need to come up with a way to implement technology in our lives that is not so conflict-based as it is right now, to be able to deal with the problems that we see here in this video at the end, because it's all about how we will be able not to save our planet. I think that would be the next way, the next typical way of talking about things that is completely wrong. We don't have to save the planet. What we have to save is humanity on this planet. So thank you very much, and hope we will all live in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.